Good morning. I hope you're having a good week. Actually, it is a good week because the governor announced that all restrictions are being lifted Friday, right before the holiday weekend. And those vaccinated don't need to wear masks any longer, even inside. What a great incentive to get vaccinated, don't you think? Well, today is Women of the Bible Wednesday, and we will continue the story from last week, but today we're going to focus on Rachel. If you remember, Jacob, on the run from his brother Esau, reaches his uncle Laban's house and immediately meets Laban's beautiful young daughter Rachel, whom he falls madly in love with. When Jacob asks for her hand in marriage, Laban basically says he must earn it by working for him for 7 years. So, for 7 years, Jacob does just that, waiting and anticipating the day he would finally hold Rachel in his arms and make love to her, consummating their marriage. But on their wedding night, Laban slips the older, much less attractive sister Leah into the wedding tent, and only when he sees the light of dawn and Leah lying next to him does he realize what has been done. But it's too late. He's married to Leah. Now, as I said last week, one has to wonder how Jacob could have been fooled by that. I mean, couldn't he tell the woman in his bed was the wrong one? Well, apparently not. It seems in ancient times the wedding tent would have been dark, lit only by a couple of candles. The bride would have been covered completely, especially at her wedding, and there would probably have been plenty of wine going around, so I suppose it's possible to make that mistake. Understandably furious, he demands the bride of his choice. And Laban says he can marry Rachel after his and Leah's wedding week is over, but only if he promises to stay on and work 7 more years to earn her. Well, of course he will, because he is passionately and crazy in love with Rachel. Actually, theirs is one of the great love stories of the Bible. However, once married, Rachel finds herself unable to have children. What's worse is the pain of watching Leah produce one son after another for Jacob. In fact, the first thing Rachel says in the Bible is, "Give me children or I will die." See, as strong as her faith was, Rachel felt like God didn't see her and certainly didn't hear her prayers. And so desperate, like Sarah was with Abraham, Rachel offers her maid to Jacob so she might legally provide her with children. And then Leah, seeing what she's done, follows suit with her maid, and both have sons. The thing is, even though Rachel was loved by her husband more than Leah, she was unable to give him the one thing a woman was expected to give her husband, a child, hopefully a male child. But her sister Leah was, and in fact gave him 6 sons and a daughter. Think about this for a minute. At a time when the value of a woman was measured in her ability to bear children, especially sons, Rachel would have felt the shame and pain of barrenness. Truth is, we tend to feel sorry for Leah because she wasn't loved by Jacob, and we should. But Rachel did nothing wrong. Both women were manipulated by their father and had little say over their own life circumstances and relationships. Imagine waiting 7 years for the man of your dreams, and then on your wedding day, after all the planning and primping, your dad says, "Sorry, but your sister's going to marry him instead." What? Can you imagine the shock, the disappointment, the anger, the sadness, the pleading? "No, Dad, please. I love him. Don't do this to me." "Sorry, but you'll have to wait. Your sister gets him first." How would you feel about your dad, about your sister? In all honesty, I know I'd pretty much hate them both, at least in that moment. And I definitely resent my sister for being able to give the man I love, and who I know loves me, children when I can't. So one day, after years of praying, crying, and hoping for God's intervention, in desperation, she asks Leah for some of her son's mandrakes. Now, mandrakes were a special kind of vegetable whose root apparently resembles the human form with a torso and 2 legs. That was widely used in medicine, magic, and for aphrodisiac purposes over the centuries. In fact, they say, according to folklore that is, that the tubers even shriek when pulled from the ground. For Rachel, this was hopefully a way to enhance her fertility, and she was willing to try anything. Well, Leah resists. So in exchange for the mandrakes, Rachel gives her night with Jacob to Leah, who, by the way, conceives again. But guess what? So does Rachel. She finally gets pregnant and gives birth to a son named Joseph. Yes, Joseph of the coat of many colors fame. Hallelujah! And both parents are over the moon. And Jacob will obviously and unashamedly adore this son more than his other children. Well, after laboring years for Laban, Jacob decides to take his family back to Canaan. On the way, they pass through the land where his brother Esau lives. Still worried about his betrayal and Esau's anger, Jacob fears for his family's safety, so he sends a generous peace offering of livestock. But he's not sure this will be enough to appease Esau, so right before the two meet, he takes some extra safety precautions to protect himself and his family. And even though Esau is in fact happy to see his brother, Jacob's strategy once again reveals who his favorite is. See, he sets the maids and their children in front, followed by Leah and her children. And safely shielded at the rear of the pack are Rachel and Joseph. Nice guy, huh? Well, anyway, as they travel, Rachel becomes pregnant once again. How about that? However, her labor is very difficult. And sensing life draining from her, she knows she won't be the one to raise her young son and watch him grow. And her midwife knows this too. So in between the tears of grief, sorrow, pain, and fear, hoping to give her some good news in the midst of her despair, she says to Rachel, "Don't be afraid, for soon you will give birth to another son." Bleeding uncontrollably, she catches just a glimpse of her newborn son before the darkness of death washes over her. But before she dies, she names him Ben-Oni, son of my mourning. Jacob will call him Benjamin. And with his birth, the 12 sons of Jacob will eventually become the 12 tribes of Israel. And with that, Rachel becomes the first woman in the Bible to die in childbirth. But though this story ends in tragedy, Rachel's love and agony haven't been forgotten. Rather, her story is remembered by those going through times of deep grief. In fact, from her torment comes the famous cry in Matthew 2:18. "A voice is heard in Ramah, weeping and great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children and refusing to be comforted because they are no more." Matthew is quoting from the prophet Jeremiah, who pictures Rachel weeping over the fate of the Hebrew exiles. In the New Testament, Matthew is reiterating her grief as he recounted Herod's slaying of all boys under 2 at the time of Jesus' birth. You know, for most of her life, she experienced the emotional pain of thinking that the one thing she wanted the most would never happen. I understand that, don't you? I mean, sure, Jacob loved and adored her, but it must have been so hard to keep her faith going as year after year she saw everyone else cradling their babies while her arms stayed empty. And in her story, we are reminded that God's people are no strangers to heartache, grief, and tragedy. Yet, the promise of God assures us that no tear goes unnoticed. God sees it all, and in His time will use the broken, fragmented pieces of our lives for good. We just have to try and stay faithful through them all. And that's the hard part. After her death, unable to bury her in the family tomb because they were traveling, Jacob buried Rachel along the road, just outside of Bethlehem. And there he set up a pillar at her grave. And the site of that marker has become a pilgrimage destination for thousands of visitors each year, and especially for those praying for their children and seeking help becoming pregnant. It's also become a popular destination for practitioners of Kabbalah, a form of Jewish mysticism. Many Jews and non-Jews alike believe that wearing a strand of red yarn that has been wrapped around Rachel's tomb, the third holiest site in Judaism, will protect the wearer from the evil eye. By the way, Leah lived many years after that, growing old with Jacob. And one can only hope that after all the years of anguish, tears, and faith, she and Jacob developed a closeness, or at least a mutual respect and comfortableness with each other. And I'd like to think she finally found some happiness. And when she died, she was buried in the family tomb at Machpelah, alongside Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, Rebekah, and her husband, Jacob. Now, my friends, stay safe, stay hopeful, always, and stay well. Please get vaccinated if you haven't, and encourage others to do the same. Enjoy the rest of the week, and don't forget to find some blessings. Know that I love you, and I'm praying for you. God bless you. Peace.